Hello, everyone. Today we'll discuss about the module D4, hierarchy design. As I said when I started, if you have questions about this module, previous modules, course questions, you can write them in the chat anytime. And as I will find breaks, I will answer them, or I will just answer them instantly. So we'll start with a short question. As usual, I will share my screen and I will present you the question. So the question is, which is a good scenario when will you use a hierarchical organization of objects? And this is not only for databases. If you know the answer for databases, give it in the databases context. If not, feel free to give this answer in any other concept. Object-oriented programming, even your planning of tasks, or any other context that is familiar to you, and present such a scenario. So write it in few words, like one short sentence, and sure, after you post your scenario, you will have the opportunity to discuss what others posted. Okay, so these are your current answers, and as you can see, we have if we have a business with various roles for employees, like manager, boss, employee, these are situations that was described. Somebody else said when you have a super entity, but didn't define what a super entity means. So if we want to use this situation, you need to define what's a super entity because it's not trivial. Or cooperate ladder, yeah, in a way that's similar with business and various type of employees. And the last version, when different entities share attributes, that's also a possibility that might happen, but it's not very specific. So let's go with the first situation that was supported by one other student, and let's try to identify when this will be a good situation. So we'll have a business. We can take let's say let me think of a business that we haven't considered and is not in one of your presentations. Okay, let's say we have let's put it this way. Landscaping business. And let's say you have a manager, you have CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and you have employees that are hired, that the business has, or all these type of employees. Now, do you need a hierarchy? That's my question. And just yes, no. So please try to answer very. So my suggestion will be no. At this point, we don't need a hierarchy, but as more information will come, we might need a hierarchy. So we'll watch the specification to see if it will ask us to do a hierarchy. So we keep in mind a possibility of a hierarchy, but at this point, it's much easier with this information just to draw, to have an employee entity, and then I will I will need to have a kind of ID that will be the primary key and the name or so on. But somewhere I will have the type. And this type may be one of the informations that I just indicated. So this type here may keep if it's a manager, if it's a CFO, if it's something else that is not in this list, but it will appear later, or even the employees, I may classify it's a landscape company. Some of them will work for cutting grass, others will have other, for instance, arranging flowers or cutting trees, or some other type of employees that will be specialized. So I can always do this kind of adaptation. So here I need to have a first name, last name, and so on. That's not our intention to be complete at this point. So based on these specifications, that's the most I can do. So what I will do next will be to add to my specification some information and ask you again the same question. So let's modify a little bit the specification. And so I will duplicate this. And I will modify, I will add to the specification. At a given point, I will not be able to add, but for now, I can still add stuff. So let's say a manager will manage several employees and an employee has a single manager. Some employees do not have a manager. So basically, we clarified a little bit what a manager is, and we used these kind of definitions before. So again, I come with the same question to you and ask you, do you need a hierarchy? So we now make the representation more specific, right? So it's much easier to take this decision if we need or not a hierarchy. So let's see this question. And again, answer yes or no if you need a hierarchy. So we are like 50-50 here, yes or no. And many of you answered. So which is good. So we are undecided. Now let's think how I will represent the information that I just received. As it's presented here, it's true it's only for managers, but as it's presented, this seems to be a relationship, right, between an employee and another employee. It seems like only managers will have this relationship, but it's not very clear if a manager can have its own manager. Somehow might have. It's not clearly saying, okay, a manager cannot be managed by some other managers, a kind of super manager. So that's a possibility that is not excluded. And it's clear that some employees will not have a manager, like the CEO maybe will not have a manager for the company or CFO. Now, as it's formulated, this seems to be a relationship. This doesn't seem to be a property that will require a big differentiation between employees. Sure, a few of them will not have this relationship, but in any relationship, not all elements participate in the relationship. Now, this is a special relationship, so if we want to draw it, it will be a unary relationship because it's between an employee and itself. So, will be, as it's formulated, seem to be a one-to-many relationship because we have a manager who manage several employees. So one manager, several employees, but one employee has a single manager. So because of that, I have a one-to-many relationship. So basically, I don't need a bridge or something. I can have just a unary relationship here that will tell me that actually it's not strong, it's weak. So one employee can manage another employee, and we know that one employee can manage several, but an employee is managed by only one. And also, if we look at participation, an employee may not have a manager, so I will have 0 here. And I will have employees who are not managers, that's clear, so I will have a optional there as well. Now, because I have a one-to-many, I need to put a foreign key to represent this, and this will be, let's say, manager ID, which will be the ID of the employee who is the manager. And this will be foreign key, but is not unique or not null, so has no other property because this one, it's just, it's optional, may not be for some employees who not have a manager, and because this is not required, it's not null. It's not unique because I can have 2 employees who have the same manager. So because of that, I don't have any other properties to write about the manager ID, except the fact that it's a foreign key. So as you can see, we started to write a lot of information here, and still we didn't need a hierarchy. So you may ask, okay, but then when we need a hierarchy, this is so, these examples that become more complex, and here I can make it much more complex. I can, one second, change what I'm playing. So here I can make it much more complex. I can add information that I want to keep about employees, like first name, date of hiring, social security, even information about how much they work. And still, I will not be able to will not make sense to differentiate between them. Now, I will give you another situation. Same business, so we keep everything that we did up to now in mind, but I will explain some other issue about employees, and so this will be like, and again, it's a continuation. So everything that we said about this case stays as it is, but I will add the following information. Some employees are full-time, others are part-time. For part-time employees, we want to keep each day how many, want to keep the hourly rate, and let's put how they want to be paid. Cash, check, or bank transfer. For full-time employees, we will keep their annual rate B minus or weekly. I don't know if weekly payment, and let's say they are paid weekly, and the bank account. I do not allow me, unfortunately, bank. I will put just AC from account. I cannot write more. So, but let's say this is what I put there. And now I'm asking you again, do you want to create a hierarchy, yes or no? And I'm activating. So in this case, I will agree with you. Yes, it's time to create a hierarchy. And why now is the time? Because now I still have only employees. So you say, okay, I don't have another entity. Yeah, it's still only employees. But about employees, I created two different, I learned about two different categories. And about each category, I keep different things. So about the full-time employees, I want to have annual salary, weekly payment, which will be sure. You can compute that one. It's okay. If I know the annual rate, I can divide it by 52 and get the weekly payment. And the bank account information like bank account, routing number, and so on. So I can make them a direct deposit to pay for their weekly work. Sure, there will be probably other information, but at a minimum, for all full-time employees, I will keep this information. Now, for the part-time employees, I will need to keep completely different information. I will have hourly rate and how they want to be paid, like cash, check, or bank transfer. So if it's bank transfer, probably I also keep the bank information there. But for hourly employees, I keep different information. So this is very, very important because now I have two different groups of employees and they don't share some attributes. And these groups can be significant. I don't know. If there are only 10 employees in total, I will not have a problem. I can still keep this entity at all these attributes and have just one attribute that will tell me if it's a full-time or a part-time. So I still don't have all the information to take a decision, but my next question will be how many employees are. So if there are 10 employees, we can keep a single entity. It will not be worse. I will not save much by creating a hierarchy. However, if I have a 1,000 employees, let's say it's a company that has many do landscaping in many states and I have many employees on my payroll, then it's clearly that it's better not to put everything in a single entity because it will become very, will have many attributes and it will become harder to manage. So in that situation, when I have many employees, I would like to differentiate between full-time and part-time employees. So what we do then, we'll keep our employee as a super entity, as a general entity, but we'll create two sub-entities that will reflect the two cases that we have. So what we'll do, we'll need to have a let's put here PT and sure you can write in full. So this is a part-time employee, and we'll also have FT full-time employee, and these two will be like sub-entities for my employee entity. There will be two categories of employees. Now I will keep the employee entity as it is. I will not change that, because here I will keep everything that is common to all employees. Now, what is different between them, between the part-time and full-time, I will put in these two sub-entities. And there is a big difference between how we design this and how we implement. When you implement, you use one-to-one relationships. When we design, in some design software, we have some special symbols. In MySQL Workbench, they don't have these symbols predefined. So you will need to take the picture that I posted on in your learning materials and put that one on the diagram as an image just to reflect the organization. But in many design tools, you'll be allowed to do what I am showing you here on the screen. In Workbench, you are not. You put just one-to-one relationship instead of what I'm doing, and put a picture over, like many videos present. So I will not, you have that in other videos. So here, we have the super entity, and we have some stuff that we like to tell about it. And then we have the two sub-entities. And we'll start describing now how this is organized. First of all, and I already told you, we have a kind of one-to-one relationships here, which means these children will have, and this is the relationship are strong because their primary keys will be exactly the same like the primary key of the employee entity. So I will have here employer ID, which will be a primary key and foreign key. And I will have here an employer ID that will be a primary key and foreign key. So these are always happening. So always I will keep for the sub-entity the same primary key as for the super entity. And we will guarantee that basically here I have the same thing about the same entity instance about which I am talking. Some attributes are here, but you might have other attributes in these two other categories. Now, the next thing that we need to, when we discuss about the hierarchy, the next thing that we need to decide is if it's named disjoint or overlapping. And I will explain you what this means, and then I will ask you to answer a query. And see if I can put the query. So you don't see the screen, but answer my poll. So I send you the poll and answer if it's disjoint or overlapping. And I will explain now what it means. Disjoint means if I have an employee, it must be only one of them, cannot be both of them. Can be part-time, can be full-time, can be none, but cannot be both. So this means disjoint. Overlapping will mean I can have an employee who is both part-time and full-time. And that's the meaning of disjoint and overlapping. And now I'm asking you, what's the case? And answer if you have an answer. I will stop the poll now. All of you answered disjoint, which is good. This is the intuitive way. However, I can tell you, I don't know yet, because I generally will ask the customer, is it possible for a full-time to also work extra and receive some, overpayment or something as a part-time? Do you do that? And they may say no. To have extra hours, we have this procedure for the full-time employees. They will be paid like, I don't know, their hourly rate or something. We don't give them as part-time for that time, and which is correct. But some companies may do a trick and don't do that. So always, if you are not sure from the specification as a customer, or looking at specification to be sure that nowhere is specified. Many times you'll find in the specification for your homework some indications like sometimes I may have somebody doing these both roles. If it's possible sometimes, then means it's overlapping. If it's possible sometimes to have an employee having both roles, then means it's overlapping. So in our case, let's go with disjoint because this is a natural situation here. The other decision that you need to think about the hierarchy, if it's a total relationship or a total hierarchy or a partial hierarchy. Let me do first of all. And I will not visualize you. You can answer now. I created the poll. I will show you how you mark. If it's a total, we put 2 lines under the circle, and we generally link like this, what's under it. So this is total, and if it's partial, we put a single 1 line under the circle. And shall we link the entities under it, and the super entities above. Now, what's the difference? Total relationship means that if I have an employee, it must be in one of the subcategories. Here we have 2 categories, but we can have more than 2. So if I have an employee, it's either a part-time or a full-time. I cannot have an employee that does not appear in the subcategories. So an employee must be either part-time or full-time. Now, if it's partial, it means that I have some employees who are part-time, some employees are full-time, but I may have some employees who are neither one. So they are neither part-time or full-time. They are paid somehow differently. So in that case, this will be partial. And again, in a company, I can have both situations. So this depends on the specifications. Now I will stop the poll. Press something if you want to. And in our case, the specification was not very clear. So both answers are in a way correct. It's more likely to be total because we said that the employees can be either one or the other. But let's say the CEO, maybe it's paid only by stock. So it's another type of payment. So it will not appear in any of these, or the owner may be paid somehow differently to keep all the profits. So, but still will be an employee from a tax perspective. So it will appear in the employee list for other reasons. So that's why it's important to go back to the specification and look. Based on the current specification, there is nothing to tell me that I have such exceptions, but if you have such an exception, you need to make this partial. So what we'll do, we'll make this total. And now we have our hierarchy. Sure, what we like to do is to finalize, and for the part-time, we said that we keep our the rate, which will be required, but not unique, and pay type, which can be a one character. So this will be able to be just one character, and also will be required and not unique. So that's what we decided to keep for the part-time. For the full-time, we said we'll have annual rate or salary, and this will be required. And sure, the weekly one we can compute. We generally don't put in a database data that can be computed. If we have a formula based on which we compute, there are many ways in which we can create images of an entity to compute them. So if the weekly rate is just the division of the annual rate to the number of weeks, then I don't need to keep. I keep either the weekly rate or the annual rate. I don't want to keep two redundant informations, because then if I modify one and forget to modify the other, I will be in trouble. So we don't put computed value except the case in which we are specifically asked to. And here we are not specifically asked to, so we will not keep the other one, even if it's in the specification, because it's computed. We don't need to keep it. We can compute and display to the user each time when they want, if it's just the division of it by the number of weeks in the year. Now, the other thing that we need to keep, it's like bank name and bank routing and bank account. And all of these will be required, but not null, because even the account can be shared between two employees. Two spouses, they will share the same account. So it's not necessary to have different accounts. So this is an example of a very simple hierarchy on your case. But what was important in this example is that we didn't jump to create the hierarchy until we were not sure that we need one and for what we need one. Because initially the impression was, oh, I have these employees, manager, CEO, and CFO, and typical employees, and then I need a hierarchy with these types. No, this was just an attribute, it was a false hierarchy there, but we had further in the description of part-time and full-time, and that was a real hierarchy. So be careful when you read specification. Sometimes a list of types is not a hierarchy, it's just various values that an attribute may have. So don't be fooled by those values. To create a hierarchy, generally we need two things. We need either to have quite different attributes for subclasses of the same entity. So I have an entity, I have two groups of people or things in this entity that have quite different, or 2, 3, 4 different groups that have different attributes. And my entity has many instances, that's also important. It doesn't have many instances, it's not a problem to create a single entity with all these attributes. Because if I have only 10 instances, I will not lose a lot of space. Now, if I have 1,000 and or more than 1 million, and I create one entity with all of these attributes, for half I will have no values for some attributes, and for the other half, let's say, I will have no values for other attributes. So this will be a waste of space in my entity, and also the design will not be nice. And because I have many employees, it will justify to have this. Now, again, in your homework, we don't make optimization based on how big are these entities. If you have different attributes, it's one reason to create this differentiation. Now, another reason, if they have different relationships, let's say we may have different type of relationship between sub-entities. This is not a good case. I don't have here a good different relationship between full-time and part-time, but let's say for full-time employees, the company will do some tax forms, and I will link the full-time employees to the tax form that I complete for them. Why for part-time employees, I don't do tax forms. That's a difference between the two types of employees. Then, because I have that relationship, again, it's another reason why full-time employees will have a relation here with some tax form. Let's put it just as an idea. Tax form. And this relationship also is a reason to create a hierarchy. But generally, if I have a single attribute or a single relationship, here I had a single relationship that was different, I still didn't create the hierarchy just for one relationship or one attribute, because it was not worth the design to do it. However, if I had several such arguments, then it's becoming more clear that it will be better to have the hierarchy. Now, as you see in design, many times it's not a clear cut. It's not there is a gray area. Sometimes it's clear that you need to do something. Sometimes it's clear that you don't need to do something. But there is a gray area that will depend on how you want to create the model. And this might be, in the gray area, things are allowed both ways. Now, in your homework, I try to be very clear which way you go. If it's not clear, then better ask before you do your homework. So it's fine to send me an email and ask me, okay, I am not sure if you wanted this or something else here. And I will clarify for you. And also, if it's not clear in the specification, I'll clarify the specification. So ask if you are not sure which way to go. Now, let's go back to my computer. And what we like to do now is to consider another example. And we'll go through the same process, and I will. So go on the website for our course. I have my view, you have your view. In my view, I will keep the designer view, because I can show you several things that you cannot see, but you can also see them in your view. So feel free to open this on your computer, so you'll be able to identify what I wanted to talk about. Now, Blackboard is not the best LMS, and based on my knowledge, I might be wrong, maybe they change, but they don't have a SQL database in which they model the information that is on their website. Not even for things like tests and so on. They don't have a SQL database. They have another type of database, which is NoSQL. And because of this, there are many problems that may arise, mostly from a design point of view, from my point of view, not from you as a student, but from my point of view, there are some limitations and problems that might arise from this design. Now, let's say we want to create a SQL database for Blackboard. And as you can see here, I have a page that is displaying, for instance, this module, and we will not do for everything. I just will go step by step and ask you for various elements. So let's look at this page, which is it's a design module that appear in the left list. So let's ignore this left list. So I will close it so it's ignored. And let's look just at this page that I have here. Basically, when you open it, you will see various things. You will see this description, and then you will have various modules that you will work with. So my question to store this kind of information is, do we need a hierarchy or not? And if yes, why? So I will give you the opportunity to answer these through a text. So more than just a few, more than a yes or no. So write your reason. So considering this design folder, my question is, if you to represent in a SQL database all the elements that are shown in this design folder and similar folders like this one, you can look at other folders as well. If you will use a hierarchy or if you will use just an entity, and again, try to say one or another and why. What was the reasoning for which you pick the decision? So if we look very superficially at this page, seems like all these items that I see, all these content items are the same, right? So they have a title, they have some text that is displayed, and sure, I may have an order in which I represent them. I may have some kind of sequence in which they are shown each time. So if I need to represent in a SQL database, that's something that I will need to put, like which are the items and in which order they appear, and their title, their content. But if we go one step further, we can see that I can click on one, and then I go from B1 to a folder that is very similar with my initial folder. So basically the design was kind of different. So I have this design that it's a folder, while this module database is just something I cannot click on it. It's not a folder. I just can see it, but this one I can click on it and go, and it's a folder. In your case, when you go and inspect this, you have a similar behavior, different than what I'm showing you, but it's similar in the effect of going inside the folder and seeing what's inside. And if we look here again, we have some items, we have some folders, but I also have some other items that have a completely different behavior, like tests or like assignments. This one, it's an assignment. It's a different type of activity. This one, another assignment, again, a different type of activity. So we start to see that even if as a superficial look, all of them look the same as a structure, they behave and have different information. So a folder will have a relationship with its content. Assignment will have a relationship with how you do the assignment. When you start an assignment and you click on it, it will start to ask you to do various steps. In my case, if I'm clicking on it as an instructor, I can configure that assignment to be taken in a given way. So as you can see, basically, they are not the same type of items. So in this case, if we do an analysis of what we need to do, we'll determine now a hierarchy is good. In this case, the hierarchy is good. There are shared elements, which will be like the top entity, the super entity, but there are different characteristics for each type of content item. And if we look here, you don't see that, but you will see these are all possible elements that I can include on a page. Some of them you saw, some others you didn't. You saw in some courses, or in my course, there are several that are present, some others are not. Same for assignments. There are some assignments here, test you had, assignment you had, others you didn't, and so on, and tools and so on. So as you can see, a page module in our case, a folder, how it's named in their content folder, the customer terminology, can have various items in the content. So for this reason, because I have different attributes and different relationships that appear between various items that are in such a module, even at this level or at the top level, I need to create a hierarchy. So to be correct here, I will need to create a hierarchy. So let's get this hierarchy together. So what we'll do next will be, so let's put here, so I want you to give me the super entity name. So the top entity that you want to put in the top, which should be the name that you will suggest. And sure, I'll make it a query answer. So you can create one and then you can vote on what others are suggesting. And again, just to be clear, you answer what I want a way to store this information that you hear, to be able to store the information about D1 single. This will be like an entity instance. D1 single entity design will be like an entity instance. 214 design, it's another entity instance. Module designing the database is another entity instance in the entities that I want to create. If I go here in the D1 entity design, this particular quiz, it's another entity instance that I want to put in this entity. So all of these are examples of entity instances that I want to put in my entity and store them in a SQL database. So these are the answers. And why we clearly need a course entity. So I will have a course entity, that's undisputable, because Blackboard keeps several courses. But I never showed you the page where you see several courses. I didn't ask you to do that page. I didn't ask you to model several sections of this course or several courses that are on Blackboard. What I asked you to model was this information. And as I said, this is an entity instance that I want to put here. Will be an entity instance of a course. If I write there, quiz, webcam, and so on, will be sounds like a good entity instance of a course? Clearly not. So basically what I have here are content elements. So this is what I have. I have content items. Now, there is a bit of a problem because I have an item here, like one type of content, and this is a type of content which is name item already in the customer language. So what I will put here, I will just put content as the name of the entity because it's like the super name for all these elements, all our content that I want to put in my course. And again, course, it's a good entity, but it's not what I ask you here. So I will have content as an entity. And now the next question that I have for you will be what attributes we want to put in this entities. So think about them. So these are your answers, and they are good observation, like types of content based on what you see in my particular course. Now, if we go back to what Blackboard is showing, okay. Now, from the design point of view, basically what I have here, I have some, what they have in common, they have a title. So all items have a title, which will be like this one that is shown up. So this will be an attribute. Sure, I need a kind of ID, and I will put here an ID for now, just because I know that I will need one. We may we may change it if we want to. But then I have a title. Then I have a description, and most of them have a description. It might be empty, but I generally have a description that is under it. And all of them have this description. And then it's clear that I have different types of content. So I have various types, and you identify that there are various types, but presented those values as attributes. And this is a mistake that many times people are doing. They identify values and think, no, I will create an attribute for that value. No, generally we create an attribute that will cover all those values. So I will name this attribute type, and here I can have various types. Now, which are the types? That's another question, how we classify them. From a design perspective, I have here two main types on this, several main types. Basically, they are several, not only two, but I can have an item, I can have a content folder. This is an item, this is a content folder. It's a folder that contains other items, other content. And I can have assignments and tests. So I have tests and assignment. So these are like various values for this type. So my type can be one of these values. Now, it seems like, I must have a title. I'll make this not null because it makes no sense not to have a title. Blackboard allows me not to put a title, but I will make it not null. And the type also I will make it not null. The description, I will leave it possible to be empty. Blackboard allows me to put an empty title, but doesn't make a lot of sense. So I will be a little bit more restrictive here in the design. Now, also, I have a relationship because I can have one type of folder to contain others, but I will not yet represent that one. So next question that I have, and we decided, is that actually I decided, is that it will be good to have a hierarchy. Now the question is, let's try to identify one example of sub-entity. So this will be like the super entity that all my content elements will have. Now I want to think which will be a type, an entity, like a sub-entity for content, which is a type of content that I want to have its own sub-entity. So that will be the next question. So these are your current answers. I have grade points, quiz, and question. Now, from these three, the only ones that we can see generally in this main content page will be a quiz. And that's true, a quiz will have more information than this one. So it contains this information, but a quiz will also need to have test-related information, like which are the questions, how which questions are put, in each order, how much time you have for the quiz, and so on. So there are a lot of additional information about a quiz that are not for typical content. And make no sense to keep such information for module, like a folder. So a folder will just contain a list of elements. Make no sense to contain other elements than this list. So that's why for quiz, it's a good example of sub-elements. Now, quiz is from Blackboard terminology are tests. So we'll use customer language, and we may say we'll have tests. And similar with quizzes, we can have assignment, which it's not a quiz, so it's not having a list of questions. It's just an assignment that we need to post some in response to. Now, in addition to this, we have two other elements that are shown on this page. So if this item, that is just an item, it's not, it's just an item, and it's, for instance, this module here, which the online materials, which is a folder, content folder. So if I click on it, I can see something similar like before. So here are a lot of items and another folder. So I will say, okay, I can have one item, and it seems like I don't have a lot of information about it, and a folder. Now, so this will be like the sub entity for my super entity content. Now, as we discuss, what will be the primary key, let's say, for text, because that's what you put there. So let me go back. So basically, I want an ID, but always when I have a hierarchy, when I create a hierarchy, the sub-entity will have the ID of the super entity, both as the primary key and the foreign key, because it will be the same. All these are content items. All of them are type of content. So all of them will refer the same idea and will inherit all these description, like title, description, type will be inherited by these subtypes. So what I will put here, I will put content ID, and this will be a primary key and foreign key. And this will be true for all of them. So all of them will need to have the same thing. So I will just put that there. I don't want to spend a lot of time. So we clarify that all of these basically have one-to-one relationships with a super entity, and being a one-to-one relationship and the child will be strong and will have the primary key will be the primary key will be the foreign key from the parent entity. So this is how we represent sub-entities. And then we need to add attributes that will differentiate this. And as I said, there are various attributes. We'll do one of them, but not all of them. What I'm interested to do next is to discuss the hierarchical properties, because attributes, as long as I will show them to you, you already did attributes in all the first three modules. So it's not so difficult. What is more difficult now is to decide what we put here as hierarchy. So let's see if we keep this hierarchy as is provided, and One. And it was a whiteboard. So the next question that we'll have is, what type of hierarchy? If it's disjoint or overlapping, and if it's partial or total relationship between the sub-entity and the super-entity. So I will create a question so you will be able to most of you said overlapping and partial. Now the question is partial, yes, because you saw that there might be other type of content that we haven't modeled yet. So partial, it's good, but why overlapping? As we look in the description, if I have a folder, it's not a test, or if I have a test, it's not an assignment. So each of these types needs to be independent. I cannot have an entity instance that is both a test and a folder. I cannot define that. So these are like independent types of content. So they must be disjoint, because if it's a folder, will not have questions like a test. It will just have items in the folder that are structured. So I will have disjoint and partial because I don't have all type of content here. So here I just put 4 types, but can be more than 4. And in that case, that's how we will look. Now, again, in your workbench, you will not be able to draw this one. You will put one-to-one relationship, and you will import this picture from the Blackboard. I put this picture on Blackboard. You can take it and insert in your workbench as a picture. So we could just clarify that this one is the disjoint partial character relationship. Now, sure, for a folder, as I said, we can have various others. We can have a relationship. There are many other attributes that each of them can have. I will not discuss them at this point. So no description, but what I wanted to discuss is that for a folder, it might have other content items inside it. And the main problem that appear here is that this relationship is also related. Okay, so this item belongs to a folder, and basically all the content that I have on Blackboard must belong to a folder. So there are some folders which are top-level folders that don't contain anything, but other than that, if I have an item, it must belong to a folder. And take another color, and my folder must contain such items. Now, to specify these, what type of relationship I will have? So folder will contain many. If I have one folder, I will have many content items in it, but content item will belong to a single folder. I cannot have a content item that is in several places. It's belonging to one. So it's a one-to-many relationship, and it will look strange, but and it's weak. And we'll draw something like that. Let me share the whiteboard again. And this relationship will specify for a content item to what folder it belongs. So folder, I think here, contains content, and I know that one piece of content belongs to a single folder, but a folder contains many pieces of content. Now, a folder may be empty, So when I create a folder, it's empty. So I may have 0 pieces of content in a folder because the folder is empty. And as I said, there are some top level content that may not belong to any folder. So there are pieces of content that don't belong, that are not contained in any folder. So because of that, I put also here optional. So as you see, both parts of this relationship are optional. Now, to represent this, I will need a foreign key. And our foreign key will go in the many part. Already, the foreign key will need to go in the many part. So I will edit here. And this one will specify for a content item in which folder it belongs. And this will be folder ID, which is also content ID, as we know, but I need folder ID just to be clear what it represents. And this will be a foreign key. And sure, it's optional and it's not unique because I can have several in the same folder. So it's just a typical foreign key. So this is how we represent, for instance, the relationship. And this is an interesting relationship because it's between one of the sub-entities with my super entity. I can have relationship between any, I can have relationship between two sub-entities. You can have any kind of relationships with these new entities. They can they can behave like any other entities. Now, you may say, okay, as we complicate this, it will be very hard to draw such complex designs. And that's true. We usually what we do, if the design becomes too complicated, we'll do parts of it that will explore some of the entities and relationships, and will not have a big, huge design. However, you don't create huge designs in the course. The biggest one will be around 10 entities, I think. So they will fit on one page. But in a real world, you usually may have several different designs for various parts of your database. Okay. Now, questions. If you have any questions related to what we did up to now. So again, think about the hierarchy. I have employees in my university, and I have various subtypes defined like staff, administrative staff, faculty, various types of faculty. And also I have hourly employees who are paid for temporary jobs. And I created this hierarchy with employee and these 3 subtypes. Is this a good hierarchy? Yes or no? And why do you think it's a good or not hierarchy? So most of you said it's okay. It's a good hierarchy. And the main idea here is because I have various types of employees. And that's a good observation. There are different types. It's clearly for staff, I will keep some things. For faculty, I'll keep different things like teaching courses. So I need to have these different types. Hourly employees, as we discussed precedently, have other attributes. So from this perspective, this seems like good sub-entities. However, the main problem here is that I use 2 criteria to create these sub-entities. So first criteria is the kind of job somebody has, which was for staff and faculty. And this is one criteria. Now, the other criteria is they are full-time or part-time or hourly. So these are like 2 different criteria that I might use to classify my employees. And as you can guess, for an employee, I may keep various information for these various roles. So this is interesting because here you may observe that for the same entity, I can have 2 different hierarchies. And generally, when we have this situation, we can do it two ways. So if I want to express two hierarchies for the same entity, I can do it in two ways. So one way is to have a multi-level hierarchy. So let me first, and I will not go in attributes here, I will just keep at the level of hierarchy. So one way to do it is to have the employee, and let's look at the two hierarchies. So one will be, let's say, I'll have staff, I can have faculty, and I can put, for instance, another category will be administrative. It can be staff, but I will just to have three categories here. I can add an administrative category. And these ones, if I look from this perspective, I can say, okay, an employee is one of these. I don't have another type of employee in a university. We need to have one of these roles. And in that case, I can send this joint and total. I make it pretty ugly there. But yeah, you see. Okay, now from another perspective, from a financial perspective, I can send an employee can be part-time or full-time. I can have a full-time employee or a part-time employee. And from this perspective, I would say, okay, again, I don't have another choice. It's either full-time or part-time. I cannot have an employee in between. So this will be a disjoint, and I can force it to be also a total. So basically, I have two different classifications, and both of them are useful. So I want to keep both of them. From a design perspective, there is nothing that stops us to keep them like two independent hierarchies, and many times we'll do that. Now, and that will be fine. I can even imagine that I can have another entity, let's say a job professor, faculty, that will be, in a way, a sub, I will not make it subcategory here because it's not a subcategory, but it will be related both to a faculty and a part-time faculty. And sure, may keep some other properties about it. Now, this will be relatively fine to have. I will not represent it this as this because it will confuse you. But what I wanted to say is that these hierarchies can be independent if we want them to be independent. Now, sometimes you don't want them to be independent. And you may say, okay, let's not make them independent. And then we will combine them and decide that for each of these, I can create a full-time and a part-time subcategory. So I can have for each of them subcategories to represent the same information. Now, which design is better? This depends. If only some of these will have part-time, then maybe makes sense to divide them and put here subcategories that represent full-time and part-time. If all of them will have full-time and part-time, creating another layer may not be so efficient, but it's possible. Now, something else that I can have a more detailed category. Let's say there are things that a faculty can do or not, depending if it's full-time faculty or adjunct faculty. let's say full-time faculty can advise students and be an advisor for students. A part-time cannot. So here I can have full-time faculty and adjunct faculty that will create another layer of this hierarchy. And I can make this join and total in this case. So what's important here is to understand, when you create a hierarchy, understand which is the criteria based on which we create the hierarchy. And often to clarify this criteria, we use what is named a type discriminator. And this type discriminator, we mark it on the hierarchy. For instance, for an employee, we may decide that we'll mark here, we'll have an entity or an attribute type which will be a letter, a char of 1. And this one will keep if what type of employee I have. And I can have S for staff, F for faculty, and A for admin, and it will tell me what type of employee I have. And having the attribute that will clarify the type helps me to keep a single criteria, to keep a consistent criteria. So marking this convention explicitly on the diagram will help when you implement the database to have a consistent database. Now, if you have the type of, this will be like type of assignment, right? Assignment type. Or I'll put here assignment. Let's put assignment. Doesn't need to be named type. So the assignment is either the staff, faculty, or administrative. Then I can have full-time and part-time will be another attribute. Employment, this will be like employment type. So employment type, which will be full-time or part-time. And here I can have, let's say, FT and PT as a value. This can be a char of 2 as a type discriminator. So what these attributes, which are type discriminators, help me to do is to keep the criteria based on which I create the hierarchy consistent. And that one was the last theoretical element that we need to discuss. Now, if it's an overlapping type of hierarchy, the type discriminator, it's a little bit more tricky because an entity can have several. And generally what we do in that case, if we want to keep the type discriminator, sometimes we don't keep a type discriminator. But if we want to keep a type discriminator, we need several attributes. So that will keep if an entity instance is one of the subtypes or not. So it's different. But for this joint, the type discriminator is very important. We always keep it and helps in keeping a consistent criteria between the various ways to organize the hierarchy. Questions? Okay, so